Welcome back to the new podcast. I'm Mikael.
And I'm Raheem.
And today we're joined by someone whose work sits at the intersection of communication science and professional development. Sydney is here with us today. She's a speech language pathologist, executive communication coach, and founder of Speak Like a Professional. She helps professionals become more effective communicators through evidence-based coaching and practical strategies. Sydney, thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today.
Of course.
Absolutely. And I'd love to start, honestly, getting right into it with your journey, because I think speech language pathology is a field many people might have heard of, but don't fully understand, right? So what initially drew you into it?
Yes. So initially, I've always been somebody who's interested in the social aspects of communication, but also very analytically and science minded. So I actually took a career aptitude test my freshman year of college. And one of the top things that came up for me was a speech language pathologist. So with further exploration, found that that was the right fit, especially as a former speech and debate kid. It was this perfect combination of, why was that kid winning first place over me? There's the science of why we respond to different communication skills in different ways. So that was initially what drew me into the field.
So it seems like it was sparked from a personal curiosity, but also, I wish everyone got this lucky by having an aptitude test that would tell you, right? Like, here.
Yes, and it worked out. It worked out. Exactly.
That's
I totally resonate with that, and I think Mikael can too. When we were in high school, we used to compete in our Model UN tournaments and conferences.
Yeah, so similar.
I remember going to my first one and not winning and being so discouraged because all of these other kids from other high schools seemed to have performed so much better than me. But luckily, I did eventually win. Mikael also won a couple times. And
Congrats.
and I agree. It really does make a difference when you walk into that conference, walk into that Model UN session with like a very confident mindset, and you're ready to really like present and advocate for like the country that's assigned to you, for example.
Right. And when multiple people, like judges, for example, come to the same conclusion about who is the best speaker or gives the best argument, what are we picking up on as humans and communicators that allows us to align what is a good communicator? And that seems to be measurable in some way. Hence where I'm like, what is going on scientifically in our brains or from a biology standpoint that is allowing all of us to make these snap decisions based off of a very limited amount of data?
That's
absolutely
great.
Absolutely. And it actually brings me back to something similar which Raheem was talking about with Model UN. We were part of a bunch of these clubs growing up, like in high school, college, right? Extracurriculars, speaking clubs. There's also, I did Toastmasters for a little bit, right? And
Nice.
so
Yeah.
you would wonder, right? So what is it about this person that makes them so charismatic? What is this energy that's radiating off of them, right? That just makes them so likable, so approachable. And that was the similar question that we were having as well, right? And I think personally for me, as I was going through actually a career pivot a few years ago, applying to hundreds of jobs, right, in the consulting world, as one does in New York City. So as you can imagine, I'm applying to the McKinseys and the Deloittes and the BCGs, having all these networking chats and coffee chats. And it's like, I'm having all of them, but I'm like, do they actually, like, do they get what I'm saying? Like, are they catching my drift? Like, how am I coming across, right? And that was one of those earlier questions that for us as well, it was like this aha moment, and also this early obsession into understanding, well, what are these signals that underlie the actual word, right? That really impact the delivery of it. And so at what point would you say you decide to focus specifically on professionals rather than a more traditional clinical setting?
Sure. So to kind of piggyback off of what you mentioned, I too had this journey of kind of fascination, hence why my career aptitude test showed speech language pathologist, of how do we connect with others and being very hyper aware of that. Quick cut. What was the question?
Absolutely, yes. The question is, and I will just I'll just redo that right here.
No, you're fine. I was gonna say, I was like, that to me, I was like, wow, tangent, and I was gonna circle back around, but literally this take is about how my ADHD made me like fascinated with communication, and I'm like, you know,
Actually,
oh,
I would love to get into that. So yes, absolutely. Let me start right here with the
perfect
follow-up.
example.
Yes. So we'll team. So at what point did you decide to focus specifically on professionals, right, rather than more traditional clinical settings?
Yes. So initially, with a background in my family in the medical sector, I come from, my father's a physician. I have a history of nurses in my family. It seemed like the natural first step was to go into medical speech pathology. So upon graduation, I spent the first 8 years of my career in rehabilitation settings, acute care settings, which was incredibly fulfilling, but also happened to coincide with COVID,
Oh, wow.
unfortunately. And so there was this kind of, exponential burnout that was happening, more rapid than I think most people would have in their careers over a short amount of time. And so I just came to the thought of, I loved my job, but it wasn't sustainable for me long term. So that allowed me to kind of explore what would next steps for me be, especially with someone who just has a speech pathology degree. What do you do with that? So upon just some more research and further explanation, or further exploration, found that there is this very small niche within a small niche of a job, speech pathology, that does corporate speech pathology. And that really seemed to be the perfect combination of those history of speech and debate, being very hyper fixated on social skills and how we respond to one another. And then I already happen to have this skill set on kind of the neurophysiology of communication, and stars aligned. And here I am with professionals.
That's
awesome.
amazing. That seems like even though it was so interrupted by COVID, it seems like such a natural trajectory for you, especially because
Yes.
it seems like you found a community, that niche you described, of people with like similar interests and similar needs really as you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as much as COVID was a nightmare as we were going through it, it's interesting how even that in my trajectory of things actually got me to where I needed to go much sooner. So absolutely.
I love that.
Absolutely. And another thing I found really interesting as we had our previous discussion as well, and as I did more research into you, you described your work as data informed feedback. So what does that mean in practice for you?
Yes. So, as I so eloquently put it when we first met, was that coming back to charisma and riz, how do we make this something that you can replicate
It gets
over
me every
time,
Right.
right? And because communication is so emotional, how do we know if we're getting better? We're coming to communication coaching, we're making this investment. I want to see that there is some type of return on my investment. So that is where this natural cadence of what we do in speech language pathology is. You have to measure growth and gains. So what does that look like for a professional in the workplace? What do they need to know about their communication skills in order to have that riz? So with that is where it kind of came back to what I had already learned in
You might need to
school. I already
trademark
had it.
something.
Yeah, I'm gonna thank you. Um,
Like a
where I
classic.
I mean, like, why have I not made that my tagline? I'm not sure. I mean, it seems like a missed opportunity, to be totally honest. Um,
Let's get on that. Yes, you have options for it.
yeah, sure. So I already had this background with the communication science, and also this interest in psychology as well. And it seemed to kind of be this intersection of what gets the psychological impact of feeling connected. But then there's also the speech science of what is happening with our muscles and how it sounds and our voices structurally in order to meet that goal. So that is kind of what I've worked on, creating a framework that bridges those two ideas, which includes consistent measurement of my clients and their communication skills based off of the context, whether that's public speaking or networking or small talk, because those all have different measurements that we're looking for.
Definitely.
Mhm.
Definitely. And I think this is actually a great point to segue into a little bit more on why communication actually matters, right? So, and let me ask you this, Sydney. So if someone asks you whether communication is a skill or a talent, what would you say?
Great question. So I say, just like any skill or talent with communication, I'm based in Kansas City, so I always give the Patrick Mahomes example, where there are people like Patrick Mahomes who naturally have this gift where they don't have to think about it. It comes intuitively to them. They don't have to try very hard. Do they also have to practice and get reps in order to be at that level of professionalism? Yes. So it's the same thing with communication. You can continue to be a great, or continue to train your muscles to be the best possible athlete that you can be, right? But that's also to say, if I picked up the football and trained as much as Patrick Mahomes, I could probably throw a football pretty decently, but I would never be as good as Patrick Mahomes, and that's okay. But just knowing that it's a muscle that you can flex and absolutely improve, but giving yourself some grace that you might not be a professional athlete. That's not the goal. The goal is just to connect and really, feel connected to the other people around us, which has a much lower threshold of what our communication skills need, as opposed to being a TED Talk host or a podcast host like this, for example. There's just different needs of what do your communication skills in order to do your job? What are those, and how do we help you meet that?
That's such a great example, and I think that really resonates with conversations we've had with musicians and singers, also in like the voice space, but not really speech language pathology. And they would definitely agree that the voice really is something that you can build upon, train, and when it comes to
like anything else.
yeah, I definitely agree. I think that although it's a different like baseline or a different like metric for everyone, it's definitely something that you can build upon.
Absolutely. And with just exactly with the voice of the muscle, is everybody's muscles move differently and have different capabilities. So what are you doing in order to strengthen that muscle for it to work best for you?
Yeah, and that's something that we really prioritize with our platform with Noor. We really wanted to be something that was non-judgmental, non-evaluative, especially because we wanted people to set their own personalized baseline going into the experience, because we didn't want them to feel that they were being like judged or compared to like Patrick Mahomes or like an external standard.
I get that all the time. And especially when I first meet people, and I tell them what I do, there's this immediate anxiety that I see on a lot of people's faces, which is, are you evaluating me right now?
Yeah.
And like a little bit, because my brain can't turn it off, but that's not how it's all about, like, do I feel connected to you as a person? And then it's the data to back that up. So I always explain that when I'm evaluating someone, I always start with my gut, which is the human part of it, of like, does this person make me feel safe and comfortable? And then what am I observing or hearing in this person that is justifying or validating that belief or gut feeling?
That's really interesting. It's actually how I see the world as well. It could be the fact that I'm also kind of neurodivergent, right? And I do kind of notice and pick up on these patterns naturally. I can't really help it. So anytime I do meet a new person, meet even like a close friend, right? I can immediately pick up on on the energy right around it, or like energy, whatever you want to call it, the cues, the body gestures, etc., inflections, whatever it may be, right? And that's exactly right. Like most people, though, I feel like they actually don't do that. Actually, so I've been as we're having these conversations, that's actually not as common as I first thought, right? So as we've been developing this platform, actually initially, we were developing it with the perspective, with our own perspective, right? My Raheem and ours perspective. Like, okay, so we naturally have these tendencies. So the way that we were developing our insight model, the amount of, I mean, the exposure that the user has, right, to the amount of data and etc. So it was like, this might make sense, but for average Joe, it might be a little truth, right? Yeah, yeah. So there was definitely this balance that we had to find. And so I imagine you've coached hundreds of professionals. What are the biggest mistakes that you consistently see, especially today, right? In a world modernized by the advent of the latest in tech, latest in machine learning, artificial intelligence. What are the biggest mistakes you're seeing today?
What's interesting with that question is it depends on a lot of things, you know, demographic, what lens people are coming from. But if I had to choose two, the first would be for women in the workplace. Almost every single woman that I work with demonstrates something called Upspeak, which
Okay.
is where at the end of your sentence, in order to sound pleasant and warm and inviting and not bossy or directive, we put the end of our sentence goes up. I
The
need to do
inflection.
this every time. We're going to do this. Where when you're an expert in your field and you're explaining your recommendation and you say it in a way that sounds like you're unsure, people can't help but project or fill in that gap for you of, you know, we don't assume you're trying to be warm and friendly. We think, well, is that the right thing that we should be doing for the team? And we can't help that. That's just how our brains are trained. So that's a lot of what I work with women as something that shows up time and time again as being an issue. Another thing that I sometimes see, particularly with my male clients, is feeling this need to almost overcorrect with making your voice lower, just because that has its own cultural view of, you know, that authoritative low voice. And what that does as we force it lower is it actually takes out a lot of the range of our tone. So it ends up sounding super monotone down here, because if it's low, there's nowhere to go. So they can end up coming off almost too flat, unemotional, you know, seeming like they're not as empathetic or as engaged or motivating as someone who might be in their more typical range. So it's interesting how a lot of us overcorrect in that way subconsciously based off of social expectations. But those are the ones that I see the most, that people are like, I didn't even realize I was doing that. I'm like, they show up that way.
Exactly. And so those are great examples of characteristics that in your voice, right, that could lead to a perceived lower confidence, lower clarity. What do you think actually makes someone sound confident? If someone's listening to this right now, they want to make a quick adjustment right today in their meeting. What is one tip you would give them?
Absolutely. So I always preface confidence as maybe one of the most complicated tones of voice to nail. Hence why it's so hard for us to just, you know, get it out of thin air, right? It's a combination of rate of speech with body language, tone of voice, how much it's varying, and then primarily inflection. So if I had to choose one thing for someone to work on to improve confidence, it would be that falling inflection at the end of their sentences. So yes, women do upspeak a lot, and men typically have falling inflection, but the way you can sound more sharp is having a sharper fall at the end. So if I'm saying something like, here is my recommendation, that sharp fall recommendation That's
recommendation.
yeah.
I'm
Instead of
sorry.
here's my recommendation, or here's my recommendation, it's no, here's my recommendation. Here's what we're doing.
Oh, I
That
definitely think it's different.
I definitely
yeah. And so I'm always training people of, first thing is having the falling inflection, but once you get that fall, then you can start playing with how sharp is it. But sometimes people make the mistake of not utilizing the falling inflection, and then they get frustrated. They get pushed to the point where now I'm bossy, now I'm dumb. And you hear that really, really sharp fall, and then that's undermining you again of seeming maybe overly emotional when you could have had maybe, I think I'm getting a little too technical, but the slope could have been a little bit less earlier on in the conversation that would maintain kind of that authority without having to overcorrect later on when you're frustrated.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. And that's something, if you see, let's say you take like a call center example, right?
Mhm.
You have two people with the exact same script. One person closing more deals, the
Yep.
other person isn't, right?
Mhm.
What would you say is most likely the reason for that?
That's a great one. I would primarily say is that people tend to who exactly read the script. Our brains know we're reading, and we have a very different sound when we're reading as opposed to having a natural fluid conversation. So and people can pick up on that. And honestly, we live in a very consumerism world where we listen for someone when they're trying to sell us something. And it sounds like a script. Our ears hear that and immediately shut down. So for people who are working with the same script or sales, I always recommend to put it into your own words so that it feels like you as a human delivering a message as opposed to me giving you words that somebody else wrote on the screen, because the emotional connection is very difficult to fake. That's why acting is so darn hard. Is if we
Right.
could all just read words and
I
sound
mean, even just
perfectly.
voice acting. I mean,
Yeah,
voice acting.
everybody could act. Yes, yes. Anybody could act if that were
Yeah.
the case. And I think we don't even think about it that way. It's still me talking. All I'm doing is reading, but it really does have a downstream effect on how we're perceived.
And that's really interesting as well because so I noticed recently you did a workshop on active listening, right?
Mhm.
And interesting. So everyone wants to become a better speaker,
Uh-huh.
but very few people are actually intentionally, right, practicing becoming better listeners. So
Yes.
why do you think that gets so overlooked?
I would say as we are, this increasingly technological world, we are reducing the amount of hours and practice we're getting with in-person communication. So like being face to face with someone or having to communicate ideas. And this is having this snowball effect of the more anxiety you have around connection, the more you turn inwards. And what am I going to say? How am I sounding? What's their reaction to me? And so because that really has the spotlight, the other whole 50% of the interaction goes under the table. Now, I think listening has always been something that has been hard for people, but I can see how it's changing over time as, rates of communication anxiety are skyrocketing right now, especially in the younger generation. So that's only going to continue to be an issue. So what are you missing out on at work when we all need to be professional? We're not going to wear our hearts on our sleeves at the workplace. And if you can't pick up on tone of voice or body language shifts or changes from baseline, what are you missing? So really kind of trying to draw that as the goal for people of, if you're going in with the response with only 50% of the data, is that ever going to be the right response? So it's always going to miss the mark if you're really not taking the other person into consideration, and then you're just going to continue the cycle. So that is where I am always hammering that home of like, I know you want to, how you sound is really important, but if you're not picking up on all of those signals, then if your response can be perfectly confident, but that person needed a hug, you still missed the mark. I know you
Yeah.
sounded confident, but that person needed a hug. That's not what you gave.
Right.
So,
That's such a good
yeah.
point, because one of my favorite posts from your page was you made a list of 5 times listening steals the show more than talking. And I really like that, especially because I'm at a period of my life where a lot of my friends and even myself were going through like breakups and like relationship issues. And I realized that sometimes when someone's going through like a breakup or a relationship issue, really it's the listening that matters more than the talking, because I don't
Right.
want to us as like haranguing them or like asking them too many questions about something they don't want to talk about. So
Right.
really like the listening that matters so much more than the talking sometimes.
And you know, research has shown time and time again that in interactions where somebody, you know, they'll do the ratio of speaking to listening. When you have someone who, you know, is listening 90% of the time, the other person is doing all of the talking, doesn't ask a single question about the other person, that other person leaves feeling like that person was great. They were so nice and so friendly, and I really enjoyed being around them, even though they didn't say a whole lot. Like they
Yeah.
were just present for the other person. Like
Right.
that feels like a success if that is what the other person needs. And that's why it's always important to know what is the goal. If the goal is connection and finding common ground, listening is more important. If it's problem solving, then it's a little bit more 50-50 of how do you see it versus how do I see it. So how do we compromise? So I even train people of how do you listen for what kind of conversation am I having in the first place? And then that lets you decide what ratio of listening to talking really should there be.
That's a really cool point, because so I remember a few years ago as I was applying for jobs, right? I would have to meet people, talk to them, and they're so varied, right? Their backgrounds are so varied, their experiences are so varied. I would find myself screenshotting their LinkedIn, like their journals, their history, plug it into ChatGPT and being like, hey, so I have to talk with this person, right?
Mhm.
And this is their background. Well, in what direction should I take this conversation? Like, what questions should
Sure.
I ask? Where should I pause? Where should I let them speak? So it's like, for me, yeah, that seemed like intuitive. Yeah, like I should plan that out. But I feel like, yeah, most
No.
people actually won't, right? Think about that.
Yeah. And what is a successful communicator to me or what I connect with might be different from another person. So then how do we know if it's right or not when we all have our own different opinions on what communication should look like? That's another part of coaching is self-alignment. If you communicated respectfully and it represented your values, that's successful communication, even if the response from the other person is not good. Like maybe you found somebody where you guys significantly disagree on this core issue. Like let's take politics, for example. I would love for us to be able to have an open conversation about politics, but that's incredibly difficult. But you can also measure that of like, was I respectful in how I communicated? Was I open-minded? And was it self-aligned? And sometimes that has to be the check, even if we're reading social cues and we're getting something we don't enjoy. I do that with jokes all the time. Like I'll have a joke and it doesn't land. And I'm like, well, I thought I was funny. And so that's all I can say is like, well, I entertained myself. Will I do that same joke again for this person? Probably not. But that's how I kind of label it as success of like, that was self-aligned. That's who I am as a person. And just because they didn't laugh, like we're just different.
I see that all the time, especially when it comes to that old saying, like agree to disagree. I think that, yeah, and I think that when you're having a conversation with someone, especially about something that might be uncomfortable or something you don't agree on, I think like preventing it from escalating from like a debate, conversation to an argument is a lost art. I think that for a lot of people, it gets really difficult to like stop being angry or like not too worked up about something, and really being able to like listen and like morally converse with someone is like a lost art. And I wanted to like circle back to a point you had brought up earlier about how for young people like these communication skills are becoming increasingly difficult. And I remember when I was younger, it was such a challenge for me to like go up to the cash register and like place an order, or like a stranger in public and like ask a question. And I think for like this new generation, especially after the COVID pandemic, it's going to become even harder to integrate into these like very crucial life skills.
Right. And communication, it is foundational to our survival. And people who have communicated all day, every day in person still have anxiety about it. So just to give some compassion and some grace for these people growing up in a world where they had that separation and fewer reps, if you want to call it that, like that is not a failing on their own. It's
Right.
just being, acknowledging that of like communication is really, really hard and an art form and individual and
Yeah.
I have had less opportunities than other people, older generations before me, and to just give yourself some grace and some leeway. If it's hard for you, that makes sense.
That's why with our platform, we really prioritize people who are new college grads, new to the job market. This might be their like first position in like a big company. They might be like the first family to work in like a corporate environment. And like you said, they deserve like a lot of grace and a lot of like empathy for what they might be going through, trying to fit into this like new environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that we started building Noor is because we realized communication is one of those few really high impact human skills that's really largely invisible. We can measure everything here, right? We can measure like how much water you're drinking, I mean stress, like exercise, like on and on, right? But we rarely have objective awareness of how we communicate. So our goal at Noor isn't actually to replace coaches at all. It's to give this other layer of awareness, this instrumentation layer, to be used between sessions, right? Like we talked about. So
yes,
that's a great question for you. Would be, how do you see technology like this fitting alongside the work that you do and professional coaches do?
I see it as a very, very delicate balance, and we can't take the human part out of human connection. That defeats the purpose, and what we communicate so that other humans feel us and we can agree and we can problem solve. So if we take that out of it completely, we're eliminating what the goal is.
Well
so said. I exactly, where I work with people, we do things together, they get that human feedback. How are they to know on their own, when their own doubts and mindset are coming in, that things are still okay? No. I know that felt really uncomfortable and I felt awkward, but my words per minute, I talked at a nice slow rate. My ideas made sense. I might have felt uncomfortable internally, but I have this data or technological support to at least confirm and help regulate my nervous system in terms of overall comfort in those situations. So just as you mentioned, I loved this example that you gave where it's, you still have to go to the doctor in order to see the whole picture, but in order to reach your overall goals, you need, we have all of these apps and technology that help you say, okay, yeah, I am managing my blood pressure. I'm doing okay. I'm all right. So when I go in for my next checkup, I can continue to grow and get better, as opposed to just constantly having to, the revolving door of, okay, well, Sydney, the communication coach says I'm fine, but I felt awkward in real life. And now I came back and I felt awkward all week. Sydney, fix it. And I'm like, well, I'm sure it actually went okay. But how do they know that? And then hence the technology piece.
Absolutely. Yeah. The human in the loop could never be replaced. That element is something that can never, right? Especially, I mean, exactly. Communication is fundamentally human, right? So there's no way for us to replicate that. And that's actually, it brings me into the future, right? Communication coaching will look like 5 years from now.
I'm going to do a little drink real quick because my mouth is getting dry.
Yes, of course. Actually, me as well.
Drink break, everybody. Ooh, coffee? Tea?
Yeah, I had made some before, but it's cold now.
Oh, that's a bummer. I was going to say, especially when coffee isn't supposed to be cold. That's so sad.
I know. Yeah, I mean, it was bad. It did its
It's been
job.
there, and now it's an iced coffee.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah,
Or a
there you go.
lukewarm coffee, I guess.
Yeah, lukewarm. Okay, yeah. So to answer your question of where do I see this going is I see it as an ongoing push and pull and calibration of how much are we letting technology communicate for us versus what am I investing in myself as the human so that I can maintain connection, empathy, all of these very important, purely human traits that technology can't replicate. So I think there's going to be this drive of possibly overcorrection of technology can do it all for me. I don't need soft skills. I'll just, my email will go through Claude,
Automate it. Yeah.
which is true. Yes, that's absolutely a tool, but there needs to be that awareness of both skills need to be in place. And I think there's going to be probably, unfortunately, some people who realize down the line that they invested too much in the technology aspect and not in the human side of it. So I see it in the future of an initial push towards technology and then this kind of overcorrection back into the human skills because we realize how much we value it. I give the example too with like when the Kindle came out, all of these bookstores were panicking, but people as humans genuinely enjoy holding a book and turning pages. Like
Yeah.
books have not been, they're not obsolete. So I think it's kind of going to be a similar thing where some people will choose to use the technology because that works for them, but there's always going to be this component of human communication and what type of support am I getting there. So I'm like the paperback book, I like to say,
Yes.
or
Yes.
hardcover
I like
only,
to
hardcover
read.
book. Fancy.
Time.
Yes. So yeah, that's kind of what I see it is, and I think with all new technology, there's always that push to take it on and to integrate it, and then we realize, wait, customer service when it's a robot is not great.
Right.
I don't like
Right,
this.
right,
Yeah.
right. Absolutely. And that is right. There's of course, like any innovation, there's concerns, but there's also exciting elements of it, right? But yeah, it's about
Absolutely.
how do we ethically balance those and bring us into, of course, the next generation, but not lose those human elements that make us human. And that's really awesome, Sydney. I know we're kind of running short on time, so I'm just gonna do a little close,
Okay.
and
Cool.
and then I'll stop recording, and then we can chat for like 2 seconds, and then yeah, cool. So, Sydney, this has been fantastic. I think what really stood out is that communication isn't just about becoming someone else or yourself. It's about becoming more intentional, more aware. And we really thank you so much for sharing your experience and expertise with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been lovely.
Awesome. And if you're interested in the future of communication intelligence, you can also learn more about what we're building at Noor. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next episode. Goodbye.